In this brief video, we'll talk about writing test cases to meet MCDC requirements. Let's first go over some definitions. The term MCDC stands for Modified Condition Decision Coverage, where a condition is a Boolean expression and a decision results in a change in control flow based on one or more conditions. Some examples of a condition: you could have a Boolean variable, a Boolean function, or any type of logical expression. An example of a decision: this is from a routing example where you may validate the message and then look at the destination. If it's local or the message type is broadcast, then you would deliver the message. Otherwise, you might discard the message. In general, you'll have 2 to the nth combinations of conditions, and in this specific example you'd have 8 combinations in total because you have 3 conditions. Let's take a look at the different coverage types. Statement coverage shows you whether each line in your code has been executed or not executed, but it does not take into consideration the outcome of decisions or conditions. Branch or decision coverage shows you whether both paths of your decisions have been taken, both the true and the false path, but it does not take into consideration combinations of conditions. Multiple condition coverage tests out everything. It looks at the full truth table or all combinations. It would require 2 to the n tests, where n is the number of conditions in the decision. If n is 5, 32 tests would be required. To accomplish MCDC requirements, you could do multiple condition coverage because it does test everything. However, there's more work there than necessary. Modified condition decision coverage, on the other hand, only requires a subset of the truth table, and it still accomplishes MCDC requirements. So in general, it would require at most 2 to the n tests, or less if there are duplicates. So if n is 5, 10 tests would be required at most, compared to 32 tests in multiple condition coverage. So what exactly is MCDC? It's really a happy medium between decision coverage and multiple condition coverage. The requirements of MCDC are decision coverage plus the criteria that every condition in a decision is shown to independently affect that decision's outcome. That's where the term modified comes from. So in other words, for each condition, you need to find 2 rows in the truth table where the condition changes and the outcome changes while the other conditions remain the same. Typically, MCDC is used in conjunction with statement coverage to get the most optimal coverage metrics. Let's take a look at an example truth table for the decision A and B, or C. What we need to do is find a pair of rows for each condition that meet the MCDC requirements. Let's first look at condition A. We found that rows 6 and 2 should meet those requirements for A, and that is because the condition changes. It went from a true to a false. Also, the result changes. It goes from a true to a false, while the conditions for B and C have remained the same. So this is our pair of rows for A. You would use the same method to determine the pair of rows for B and C, and this results in 3 pairs of rows altogether. However, since a couple of the rows have been duplicated, rows 4 is duplicate and row 2 is a duplicate, this reduces down to 4 rows altogether, rows 2, 3, 4, and 6. So what you would need to do now is develop tests that match each one of those rows, and that would fully meet your MCDC requirements for testing out this decision statement. Now let's take a look at some source code to see how all this plays out. The code we will be testing is a login verification function. It gets the user information from a database and compares it against the input parameters. If the user ID or the social security number matches and the password matches, then we will allow access. Otherwise, access will be denied. So let's go ahead and write some test cases against this code. We'll first write 2 test cases that should exercise both the allow and the deny paths. Looking at the allow test case, down here in the notes section I have the actual login information for John Doe. I'm going to use that as input parameters, and that should return an allow code. So we'll go ahead and run that test case and take a look at the code coverage results. In the code coverage viewer, green means lines of code that have been executed. Orange means lines that have been partially executed. Black indicates a line that is not executable, and red indicates lines that have not been executed yet. This password check here is showing in black, but that's just because it's part of the decision up above. Looking at the coloring here on the allow test, we definitely did return the allow code, so that does what we expected it to do. Now when we run the deny test, we'll look at the parameters in the deny test. They're basically the same, except now I'm passing in a 0 for the password. So when we run that, that should do the other half of the if statement, and that's what we see now. Everything is green, and we've executed both parts of that decision statement. However, this is only with statement and branch coverage. We're not looking at it yet with respect to MCDC. So let's go ahead and enable MCDC and see what the effects are. I'll re-instrument the code using statement plus MCDC, and then I'll go ahead and rerun the test cases. And in the code coverage viewer, we'll see we got some different results this time. And checking the user ID, we've went through this code on the true path, but not the false path. And then checking the social security number, we've never even gotten to this part of the code. So that means we need to add some more test cases to meet our MCDC requirements. The tool helps us with this by showing us the truth table along with the para-analysis for our decision statement. We can see here for condition A, rows 3 and 7 meet the requirements. For condition B, it's rows 5 and 7. And then for condition C, we actually have 3 different pairs that we could pick from. Rows 1 and 2 are a pair, rows 3 and 4 are a pair, or rows 6, 5, and 6 are a pair. Let's go ahead and pick rows 5 and 6 because I noticed some duplicates here. The duplicates are row 7. We don't need to repeat that row. And then the other one is row 5. So that leaves us with rows 3, 5, 6, and 7. Those are the rows we need to test against, and when we run those test cases, that should meet our full MCDC requirements. I've got those test cases previously saved, so I'm going to import those now. After I have the test cases imported, we'll go ahead and run those tests. These are the 4 tests that we've just imported corresponding to rows 3, 5, 6, and 7. Let's compare that against the truth table. And we see here that they line up to the appropriate rows. Let's look at one of these rows in particular to make sure we understand what we have. So if we look at row 3, condition A is true, condition B is false, and condition C is true. So let's look at that test case in particular, and we see here that user ID is true, social security number false, and password is true. So let's go ahead and run all 4 of these test cases. I'm also going to deselect the coverage from our prior 2 test cases so it doesn't interfere. Okay, so now when I run these test cases, we should get different results in the viewer. And now we do see everything is green. So that means we've fully tested all of our conditions and our decision. If we look at our metrics table, we see that we have 100% statement coverage, branch coverage, and pairs. There's also an automated way to generate your tests. You can go to the function under test and insert MCDC test cases. This will insert a set of tests for each decision in that function. So in this case here, we have the 4 rows up here are the ones that we generated by hand. The ones down below are the ones that the tool generated. You'll notice here a correlation between the rows. We have the same sets of rows in each case. However, the tool can't always figure out the parameters to use. And in this case, since the parameters were in a database, there's no way for the tool to figure that out. So if we look at row 3 here with the auto-generated test case, you would still have to fill in the parameter information. But the important thing is that it identified the rows and inserted the test cases for you. And so it's a much quicker process to do it the automated way. However, it is good to go through it by hand just to make sure you understand the process. This concludes the video on writing test cases to meet MCDC requirements. Thank you for watching.